Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. If you haven't had a chance to get a lunch yet, I think there are maybe 2 left, so feel free to grab one if you can. We are really excited to have with us today Uri Goldflam, and we're really thrilled that all of you have decided to join us today. My name is Charles Schneider. I'm one of the co-chairs of Iowans Supporting Israel. And before we kick things off, there are a few dignitaries who I saw as I walked in. If I'm leaving anyone off, please forgive me. But I know that I saw Iowa Senate President Amy Sinclair here. Former Representative John Jacobson. And former state representative, state senator, and ambassador to Latvia, Chuck Larson, here as well. And I don't, have I? Oh, former Congressman Greg Gansky, there you are. Thank you for joining us today. I wasn't tall enough to see over the crowd, so my apologies. We're really excited to have our speaker here today, and I see a lot of new faces, so I'm just going to take a minute to talk about Iowans Supporting Israel. We're a bipartisan nonprofit organization. We have a 10-member board, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans. We were founded 10 years ago, and in a time like this existential moment in Israel's history, it feels like all the work that we've done, that this organization has done over the last 10 years, has really enabled us to be helpful in this moment. At least we'd like to think that we have been and can continue to be. This is our first luncheon since October 7th, but we have been busy. We sponsored a panel for the World Food Prize Symposium on October 26th. Israel's Consul General to the Midwest, Enam Cohen, was going to be one of the panelists on that panel that we hosted. After October 7th, those plans changed, and his visit here became one of diplomacy and talking to Iowans and the media about what was going on in Israel and the war with Hamas. So we helped arrange several media interviews. Hopefully you saw one of those. If you didn't, I really recommend that you watch the Iowa Press interview. I'm sure if you just Google Iowa Press Israel, it will pop up. It was a fantastic interview. And by the way, he said Iowa is the favorite state that he is Consul General to in the Midwest. So that says a lot about all of us. We also attended the solidarity meeting with the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines at Tifereth Synagogue on that day when he was here. And several of us were with our Jewish friends at Tifereth on the Monday after October 7th as well. And on behalf of the board, we really want to let our Jewish friends know that we're with you. We know this is a really difficult and challenging time. I'm sure many of you know personally people who've been impacted by what happened on October 7th. And I'm sure many of you are concerned about the anti-Semitism that we see cropping up around the country. But we are too. And we want you to know that we're with you. Our prayers are with you. Our thoughts are with you. We unite our voices with yours. We unite our actions with yours, and we stand by your side, and we will continue to stand by your side no matter how long this takes. And part of what we want to do is help Iowans understand what's going on in Israel. And Tom Henderson, my co-chair, and I have been interviewed on radio, including several of John Jacobson's radio shows and television, from Council Bluffs to Cedar Rapids. Your support, those of you who've supported us financially, has helped us to be in a position to be able to do that. And it's also helped us to be in a position to have a special guest like Uri Goldflam with us here today. I first met Uri in 2016 when I traveled to Israel with the American Israel Education Foundation with a group of Christians from the Midwest. There were about 15 of us, and we had arranged for a tour guide. The AIEF had arranged for a tour guide to take us around, and Uri was ours. And I was struck immediately by his passion for Israel and the Jewish people and for the Jewish land, and his knowledge of geopolitical affairs, not only in the Middle East, but around the world. He's the only other person I know who's read The Clash of Civilizations by Samuel Huntington. And I remember talking to you about that a little bit. You probably don't, but that's one of the weird things that I remember. And it's just exciting for me to be able to host him here with us today. Uri is a 30-year tour guider and educator. He's a noted speaker, well-renowned speaker, and he knows a lot about everything going on in the Middle East right now. And he's a perfect person to talk to us about the background of the situation in the Middle East, what brought us to this point, what it looks like now, and where it could go from here. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Uri Goldflam.
Well, what can I say? Huntington was right. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for this warm welcome. And thank you all for taking time from your busy schedules to come and spend time together and hear me talk about Israel. And thank you for your support. It's heartwarming, especially because I'm not really happy to be here. I'm glad that I am. But this is not the circumstances under which I would want to come and visit. So I want to spend a little bit of time giving you a few insights as to how I think it is best to analyze the situation going on in Israel, and to do so because there's so much information coming your way from the media, whichever outlet that you choose to view. There's a lot of information coming in, and sometimes it's really hard to make sense with everything that you hear. So I want to give you an analysis of the situation through several lenses. We're going to talk about the personal, the local, also the regional, the global, and even the civilizational. Because I do believe that the events of October 7th are a watershed moment in our history. And again, not only for Israel, but with ramifications for the entire world. And I want to walk you through that a little bit. But I also want to spend time in creating what we call common language. So I want to show you a little bit about the background of how we got to this point. Where is the Gaza Strip? What are the borders of Israel? What do all these things mean? And some of the noise that you hear out there from the river to the sea, and so on and so forth, and try to get a bit of a grasp on the geography and the immediate history that brought to this point. So I'll do that by looking first at the Middle East, which is a misnomer because it's not in the middle and it's not in the east. It only makes sense if you're British, right? It's halfway, or it's in the middle of the way between the British Islands and the crown jewels in India. All right, so that's the Middle East, and that's what we're seeing over here. It's the area that essentially are the countries that were created at the beginning of the 20th century after World War I. It's the dead carcass of the Ottoman Empire, and carved up according to European interests. When you see straight lines on a map, then you know where those lines were drawn, in an office in London. And so these are the countries that were created after World War I as a process of the removal of the Ottoman Empire and the insertion of these new nation states. The size of Israel here compared to California, but if you want to compare it to some other known places, the slide, where's the slide on Iowa? But you can understand the size here. We're talking about a country which is the size of New Jersey. It's about a quarter of the size of Iowa. It's about just under 10 million people. 7 hours from top to bottom, and maybe 1 hour from side to side. In its widest point, it's 70 miles. In its narrowest, it's 9. Right, that's about the size of Israel, as in comparison to the geography that you might know. This is our neighborhood, and it's a pretty tough one, as you can imagine. And it's within the context of these countries, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the further circle, Turkey, Iran. Now Yemen is also has joined the party, that we're seeing what's going on now. The borders of Israel also not stagnant. So back in 1947, the British have given up. The British are controlling the area after World War I. They get from the League of Nations the mandate to control the area that they called Palestine, which is a historical name given to the land by the Romans. And back then, Palestine is both sides of the River Jordan. The River Jordan is kind of in the middle over there. Let's see if this works. There, that's the River Jordan right there. And Palestine includes what will become the country of Jordan and the country of Israel. In 1922, the British make good on their promise to the Arabs and create a kingdom of Transjordan, the Hashemite kingdom of Transjordan. The British made two promises. They promised the Jews a national homeland, and they promised the Arabs a kingdom. The problem is they promised them these things over the same piece of land. And they've been trying to undo the mess that they've done for years. But in 1922, they create Transjordan. What's left is the west of the River Jordan, and in 1947, they've given up. They've given up because the British realized that they're not looking at a situation of two competing narratives, of two peoples who want to create a state, and they're arguing about where to put the line, which is how often we view or have viewed the conflict. The British already in 1947, Lord Bevan wrote, the government, we have come to the realization that we're not looking at two equal parties. One party wants to create its own state. The other party wants to prevent the first party from having a state. And you can imagine who in this description. Israel is the Jews have been trying to create a state, and the Arabs have been trying to prevent the Jews from having a state, and that's been the theme ever since. At any rate, 1947, the UN come in and they create the partition plan. They decide to divide the land based on where the majority of the population live, and the Jews will have what you see there in blue. The Arabs will get what you see there in tan, that tan color. The Jews accept, the Arabs reject. It begins a civil war starting in November 47. And when the British finally leave on May 15th, 1948, it's an all-out invasion and an all-out war of 7 Arab armies. The result is that the Arabs lose. The Arabs lose, and they lose in a big way. What was supposed to be the southern canton, or the southern part of the new Arab state, is lost to Egypt. It shrinks and it becomes only this little strip. That's the Gaza Strip today. Now, a word on this border over here. It's a line on a map. There's no line like that on the ground. And you can also understand that people don't miraculously end over here. There are people along this entire stretch of coast. They're the same people. The Arabs from Egypt who migrated up the coast towards Jaffa in the development of the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. Same families, same tribes, have even the same names. Except that the line that's drawn here is the administrative line between the British Empire and the Ottoman Empire. And that became also the border of that new Arab state, the way the UN envisioned it. All right, so they drew a line, and now the people on this side of the line are Egyptian, and their brothers and cousins on this side of the line will become later on Palestinian, but these are the citizens of the future Arab state as it was envisioned in 1947. At any rate, the Arabs lost that area and it became under Egyptian control. And it remained so until 1967. Same for the mountain area. The mountain area was supposed to be the central area of the new Arab state, the Jordanians, the Hashemite kingdom of Transjordan, invaded the mountainous area to prevent the state of Israel from being born. It shrunk. Okay, this area shrunk a little bit, but the Jordanians held on to the mountain area, including the holy sites in Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem. Instead of creating a new Arab state, they simply annexed it to the kingdom of Transjordan, changed the name of Transjordan to Jordan, with an East Bank and a West Bank. Okay, that's where the name comes from. The name West Bank is the Jordanian designation to this territory from their annexation, I should say the illegal annexation of this mountain area, and all the Arabs now living here became Jordanian subjects. So we have Arabs over here who are under Egyptian control, Arabs over here who are under Jordanian control, and the Arabs lost this part as well. And they lost this part to Israel. And all the Arabs living there became Israeli citizens. As most of you probably know, but Israel has 20% of Arab civilians, Arab citizens as part of our Israeli society. These are fully integrated and immersed Israeli citizens with all the rights and privileges of citizens, vocation, education, transportation, unemployment, health. They vote and are elected to the Israeli parliament and participate in all walks of life in Israel. And that's the map of Israel from 1948 until 1967. In 1967, Israel wins a spectacular victory. A preemptive strike against the Egyptian forces amassing on our border, and Israel acquires, conquers, captures, you can choose whichever word you like, the entire Sinai Peninsula, the entire West Bank, and the Golan Heights from Syria, West Bank from Jordan, and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. It was the first time Israelis felt that they actually have a chance. This is the new acquired self-confidence that Israelis suddenly had after 67. I would say even arrogance. I know you don't believe it because you've never met an arrogant Israeli. I know, impossible. But that sense of strength and that sense of empowerment and that sense of self-reliance was born after 1967. It's that self-confidence and, again, arrogance that led us to the tragedies of 1973. Who saw Golda, the movie? Okay, that's too few. Everybody go and see the movie Golda. Because that tragic events of 1973 is a result of the 1967 hubris. And I would argue, and those of you who have the question, how could this have happened on October 7th? It's the same hubris. All right. So 1967, Israel expands, and now we have a new term that comes into our language, the occupation. The occupation. What's the occupation? Israel's occupying Arab lands. Now, I remind you, this is the same land that the Arabs were offered in 47 and rejected it. In 1967, June 18th, 67, a week after the war, the government of Israel offers these territories in return for peace with the Arabs. All right, we offer an exchange of territory. The Arab League gets together in Khartoum and they issue the famous 3 no's. No to negotiation, no to recognition, no to peace with Israel. And the offer to exchange territories for peace, once again, goes into the drawers of history. Israel holds on to this territory. I'm going to make a very, very long story short, but eventually after 1973, the peace talks begin with Egypt. In 1979, they conclude with the return of Sinai to Egypt and the signing of the first Arab-Israeli peace treaty with Egypt, 1979, Jimmy Carter, Menachem Begin, Anwar Sadat, peace in our time. The Gaza Strip stays under Israeli control. We tried back then. Remember, Egypt controlled the Gaza Strip until 1967. And Begin said, well, you had it until 67. Why don't you take it back now? No. The Egyptians refused to take the Gaza Strip. They probably knew why already back then. But this continued presence, and again, and I'm going to use this word, occupation, in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip continued for the next several decades. This idea of the Israeli occupation of the West Bank was used in Israel and in the West to define the conflict. The post-67 world is about the Israel-occupied Arab land. That's not a good thing. Some people call it an illegal occupation. Some people call it just a disputed occupation. Some people claim that the entire presence of Israel is not shouldn't be there. At any rate, that is the source of the conflict, according to many scholars. Roll back the occupation, solve the problem. Israel gives up the territory, and we have peace. Land for peace formula. That's been the formula that's been discussed for years. Resolution 242 and 339 and the two-state solution and Oslo, which I'll talk about in a minute, all are based on the same paradigm. Land for peace. Problem begins with the occupation. The problem will end with the end of occupation. And this is only one of the paradigms and the presuppositions that have shattered on October 7th. 1993, Israel signs the first peace accord, or the mutually recognized agreement between Israel and the PLO. Yasser Arafat, Yitzhak Rabin, Bill Clinton on the White House lawn. Israel recognizes the PLO as the official representative of the Palestinian people and begins a process of reconciliation, rolling back Israeli presence in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and giving the Palestinians authority, control, and responsibility in those territories. In 1995, Israel pulls out of the main centers of population, giving Yasser Arafat and his security apparatus control of the majority of the Palestinian population. Even today, 95% of the Palestinian population live under the control of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza, meaning that Israel does not control their daily lives and they have their own autonomy in those areas. The idea was relatively simple because we couldn't come to an agreement on the big issues, Jerusalem, borders, settlements, Jerusalem. And so they said, let's talk about the things that we can talk about. Let's talk about sewage treatment. Let's talk about cellular frequencies. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about taxation and labor. These are the things that we can talk about. And over a period of 5 years, after giving the Palestinians authority and responsibility, they will have a state building apparatus. They will have their own state infrastructure, and they will have a lot to lose. And then we can talk about the big issues and come to agreement on that. That was the idea. In 2000, everybody was starting to feel that that process starting to fizzle out for two main reasons. There was resistance within Israel, and there was resistance within the Palestinian Authority. Hamas came to the front. This is the period that we're seeing the beginning of the bus bombings and the suicide attacks and the terrorism. And the backlash within Israel was so strong that a Jewish extremist assassinated our prime minister. And so these processes were starting to derail the Oslo process, which is why Yasser Arafat, Ehud Barak at the time, Bill Clinton got together in October 2000 in Camp David to sign a final agreement. That agreement gave the Palestinians everything on their wish list. 99% of the territory and all the other things that they required, with one thing that they had to give in return. Remember, land for peace, the end of hostilities, the end of the conflict. And that's what Yasser Arafat refused to do. He walked away from Camp David. Don't believe me? Bill Clinton, Condoleezza Rice, their memoirs from that period, and they outlined that very clearly. Instead of coming back with a counteroffer, Yasser Arafat began a wave of terrorism, of death and blood that Israelis have not experienced until then. And it took 5 years. So when we answer what went wrong with Oslo, this is what went wrong. And I wish I could tell you that these are the worst things that I will be talking about today. Now, Israel, in its part, took a few years to respond, but by 2002, 2003, we were starting to see a decline in the successful terror attacks from the West Bank into Israeli centers of population. And the reason is because of what Israel did around this time. And those are two things. One is an Israeli return to the Palestinian centers of population. Without Israeli presence on the ground, Arafat's terror apparatus grew wings and multiplied. Israel returned to the centers of population in order to physically, face-to-face, root out those terror infrastructure. And the second thing that Israel did is build a fence, a barrier. Some people call it a wall around the Gaza, around the West Bank. Most of the West Bank today is surrounded by a barrier, which prevents those would-be suicide bombers from walking across the street and blowing themselves up in Israel. Those of you who've been, you know, everything's very, very close. It's not a faraway land. It's literally right there, adjacent. And so those two things together were able to end what we call the Second Intifada and this wave of terrorism, and life was able to go back to normal. But, and this is the brings us to where we are today, the Gaza Strip. Throughout the entire Second Intifada, for those 5 years, there was not a single successful suicide bomb out of the Gaza Strip. Not one. Because they already had a fence. Gaza was already surrounded by a fence on the Israeli side. Okay? Again, one of those big myths that Gaza is under Israeli occupation and is the largest prison, open-air prison. It has a whole border with Egypt. Egypt, their Muslim Arab brothers, share an entire border with Gaza Strip, yet somehow Israel is the one that's supplying them, or is expected to supply them, with food and water and access. In 2005, at the end of the Second Intifada, Ariel Sharon, the prime minister at the time, decided that we've had too many failed attempts to negotiate with the Palestinians, but holding on to this territory is not sustainable. We tried in Oslo, we tried in 2000, we tried to give up the territory. We tried the land for peace strategy. It didn't work, but we still can't hold on to that territory because there are 10,000 civilians there and almost 20,000 troops. It doesn't make sense. And so in 2005, Israel began the disengagement, or summer 2005, when Israel disengaged from the Gaza Strip. It withdrew not only the civilians and the soldiers, but also the cemeteries. We took out every single Jew and Israeli, the living and the dead. Redeployed on the international border, that's the green line. I mentioned that word international border, or the Bar Association, legalese is important. This is undisputed territory. I remind you, this is Israel from 1948. It's not West Bank, it's not occupied territory. The Israeli towns and villages are not settlements. Okay, they're in undisputed parts of Israel. Israel redeployed on the international border, removed its citizenry, its military. It kept the industrial and agricultural infrastructure intact. All the Palestinians needed to do was walk in. They had the ability, they had the know-how, they had the talent, they had the international investors lined up. All that to do was step in. Within a week, they could be exporting the entire world cherry tomatoes, strawberries, and flowers, and build an industry and build high tech and turn Gaza into Singapore. Within 4 days, they destroyed all the greenhouses. They took all the pipes out of the ground and started making rockets out of them. They did not make Gaza into Singapore. Rather, Gaza became now a new terror base from which to attack Israel even further. A year after 2005, there were the elections in the Palestinian Authority. Hamas won 75% of the vote. Again, that's not me saying, this is Jimmy Carter saying. Jimmy Carter was on the ground, he oversaw the elections, he testified they were fair, without any tampering, and 75% went to Hamas. He himself wrote he was surprised that such great support went to an organization which negates the state of Israel, that is not a partner for peace, and that is considered a terror organization by most of the world's countries, or at least in the Western world. Yet they won 75% of the vote. And in 2007, they finally took over the Gaza Strip. They overthrew the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, the PLO representative. And when I say overthrew, I mean that literally. They took them up to the rooftops of the highest building in Gaza and threw them down to the street. Like literally YouTube videos. You can look it up. They lined up people on the streets and shot them. PLO, Fatah operatives ran away into Israeli arms, seeking refuge. At the beginning, it looked like this. Read all about it. Hamas gangs take over the Gaza Strip. It looks like, these armed bandits, but within 2 years after that, it's now like this, which always reminds me of the picture from Nuremberg. Hamas is now in full control of the Gaza Strip. That includes every in and out. That includes every educational institution. That includes every mosque. That includes every refugee camp. The educational institutions, by the way, are run by the UN. So this is Hamas-controlled Gaza, and a word on Hamas. Hamas is the Palestinian extension of the Islamic Brotherhood, which is a global organization. They are the Palestinian wing of the Islamic Brotherhood. This is an organization that wants to export Sharia law with the path of jihad, which I'll talk about jihad in a minute, and holy war. Not only Egypt, Turkey are all Islamic Brotherhood, or Turkey's Islamic Brotherhood. In Egypt, the previous government was Islamic Brotherhood. Now they're running for their lives. But it's a global agenda. Israel will exist and will continue to exist until it's obliterated by Islam as it had obliterated its predecessors. This is the Hamas Charter from 1988. Okay, you can look it up, the whole document. It's a fascinating read. I only have a few excerpts. Yale University, Avalon Project, very good translation of the Hamas Charter. If you have a moment, read it. This idea is not a political or territorial conflict. This is a religious conflict from Hamas's perspective. And the idea of jihad is something that you hear. You've been here for since 9/11, everybody in America knows or heard the word jihad. But folks, we lack the language in the West to deal with this concept on a really, truly fundamental basis. Jihad, holy war. What's holy about it? Why is war holy? Because the path to redemption, the path to paradise is through war, is through the killing of the infidels, with the blood of the infidels, preferably the blood of the innocents. I'm going to say this again. The best way to get to paradise is by killing infidels. And the fastest way to get to paradise is by using the blood of the innocents. Because if you're innocent, you get to heaven. Who's the most innocent? The little ones, the children. For the jihadist, for the fundamental Muslim Islamist radical ideology, our life here, our physical presence, is a tiny, tiny portion of real life. The real life begins after death, in paradise. That's when you unite with the divine. And you want to get there as quickly as possible. When they say, and we know this, that we love death as much as our enemies love life. This is what the Islamists say. They mean it. Now we hear these words. You're hearing these words coming out of my mouth. It's hard for us to grasp that some people who have children like we do and love their children like we do, would prefer that our children will die as children to get to paradise than grow up to have a successful life. It's really hard for us to grasp this concept, so we make excuses. Oh, they don't really mean it. No, it's just rhetoric. They're just using this as a way to gain more access to economic growth. If we only give them a little bit more financial responsibility, territory, then they'll stop using that rhetoric and be more like us, right? And so one of the things I want to share with you today, and one of these truths that are now self-evident after October 7th, is that we have to take them at their word. This is what they say. They say what they mean, and they mean what they say. Allah is the goal, the Prophet is the model, Quran is constitution, jihad its path, and death for the case of Allah is most sublime belief. Again, not just for their grown men and women, but also especially for the children. And it goes on, the resistance movement and the negation of Israel in any border, not just the 67 or the 48 border. On a local level, we are at a watershed moment. Israelis woke up on October 7th to realize that all the assumptions, paradigms, suppositions that they held before two-state solution, living side by side peacefully with Palestinian people, that there's a large body politic, a large population of Palestinians who are waiting for leadership so they can live side by side in peace with Israel. These assumptions are no longer relevant. The understanding in Israel is that we're not fighting the post-67 war. We're not fighting about where to draw the border. We're fighting the war of even whether there will be a border at all. It's not about where Israel will exist between the river and the sea, but if Israel will exist between the river and the sea. That's one of these truths. The masks are now off. And that's what Israelis are facing. The idea that Hamas is somehow separate from the rest of those peaceful Palestinians is something that we wish is true. We have to wish it's true. Otherwise, the reality is too unthinkable. But then October 7th happened. So I'm not going to tell you, and please don't understand from my words that all the Palestinians are Hamas. No, they are not. There are many innocents and the many people who are suffering in Gaza under Hamas rule. But that clear distinction that somehow Hamas, their 40,000 troops, are a foreign implant that came from outer space and suddenly took over Gaza Strip, that assumption, that myth also requires greater evidence. Right now, there's no evidence to support it. Hamas grew up within the Palestinian Authority. Hamas grew up within Palestinian society. Those 3-, 4-, and 5-year-old children grew up in an education system that taught them that their way is martyrdom and death. And killing Jews is the best way to go about it. Those little girls were raised to bear children who will become martyrs and to be glad that the children will become martyrs. School systems, social systems, religious systems that supported this, that encouraged this, that in 2006, 75% voted for this. So again, yes, there are innocent Gazans. There are innocent civilians who are suffering. The clear distinction requires a little bit more evidence today. On the regional level, we have another watershed moment. The lines are being drawn. Iran has used its proxies in Lebanon. Iran has an MO. They find countries that have a destabilized governments. Most of the countries in the Middle East are failed states. They find a Shiite minority, they arm them to the teeth, and they make them the strongest military power. They take over the country that way. They've done so in Lebanon. They have done so in the Gaza Strip with Hamas. They're doing so in Syria. They have done so in Yemen. You get the picture? They're doing so in Iraq. In all these places, it is Iran that's calling the shots. They're creating an axis of fundamentalism, of jihadism. Their version is a Shiite version, not a Sunni version, but that's outside the scope of this talk, in order to propel themselves into a global jihad. Israel is only the appetizer. Israel's in their way. They have to get rid of Israel in order to go west, in order to move the jihad and move and export the revolution. They've been saying this clearly from 1979. We just have not been listening. Again, making excuses for their behavior and their statements. A parallel axis has been developing in the last few years. And that is the axis between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the moderate Arab countries. It started with Israel, Egypt, Israel, Jordan peace treaties. Those were land for peace. Those are old paradigms. But in the last few years, we have new paradigms. The Abraham Accords. One of the greatest gifts, one of the greatest achievements, which Donald Trump, Jared Kushner has put forward against State Department, against all the existing paradigms of the Abraham Accords, this creation of the Abrahamic faiths that look at Jews as part and parcel for the Middle East, as indigenous, not crusader, not colonial, not invaders, as they looked at in the past. And that's the foundation for these accords with the UAE and Bahrain and Sudan and Morocco and Saudi Arabia waiting around the corner. The ties between Israel and Saudi Arabia, normalization, peace, whatever you want to call these new agreements, would have swept other moderate Arab countries into the anti-Iran axis. It would have halted Iran's advancement on their attempts for hegemony in the Middle East, which is why it was important for Iran to do this now, to move forward now to thwart this developing new axis. They've succeeded temporarily. I believe the day after, Saudi Arabia will be back in the conversation quicker than you might think. Right now, they're paying lip service. The moderate Arab countries are looking at Israel and the war with Hamas, hoping, wishing, praying that Israel will succeed. Because if Israel fails to root out Hamas, they're going to be in big trouble. Because that jihadism is a bigger threat to the Muslim world than it is to us. 90% of terror attacks worldwide are in Muslim countries. And so these countries are looking at Israel. They're paying lip service now to the Palestinians, but nobody's really doing anything. Are we waiting for Israel to win? So this regional conflict is now also taking shape and the lines are being drawn. It doesn't end there. It's a global impact as well. If you think that the war between Israel and Hamas is localized to Israel and Hamas, I have news for you. What Israel is to Iran, Ukraine is to Russia, and Taiwan is to China. We are looking at a global event. Anybody read any or see any reports from Ukraine lately? You think the war there just ended? That you haven't heard about it? No. Putin got exactly what he wanted. These lines are being redrawn. Huntington was right. This idea of the clash of civilizations is emerging in front of our eyes. Yeah, I can spend a few more hours. What I gave you earlier is only a tiny portion of the Arab-Israeli conflict, the borders, the wars. We can spend hours talking about settlements and legalities and the minutia and the subtleties and what's the word everybody uses now? The nuances of the conflict. But then we'll be missing the forest. Those of us who grew up in the 70s and the 80s, we remember the Cold War, and we remember the 90s and the end of the Cold War. We remember Francis Fukuyama writing about the end of history. Liberalism, democracy had won. Everybody wants what America wants. iPhones and jeans to everyone. What was it called? The economic peace, the golden arches. Every country that has a McDonald's will never have a war against another country with a McDonald's. Right? Seriously, that's a serious academic paper. That's a serious academic school of thought. By now we know the only theory in international relations that holds true is that democracies don't fight with each other in open warfare. All the rest doesn't hold water. So we had a post-war world where we looked at the world and said, wow, jeans and iPhones to everyone. But we're now moved, without noticing, to a pre-war world. And the lines are being drawn. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, the tyrants, the autocrats, the oppressives, the jihadists on one side, and the rest of the world on the other side. Where do you choose to stand? That's what you should be asking your kids in college. That's what we should be asking those useful idiots who are walking up with signs that are pro-Hamas signs, and from the river to the sea, and clean the world of Jews, Zionists. That's what's at stake. The future of this world, what world will our children and grandchildren grow up? What liberties and freedoms and truths will they enjoy? And that's the division. This war is not only between Israel and Hamas. This war is about what your streets and what your public squares and what your universities will look like. Choose a side. I want to spend a little bit of time to talk about the magnitude and why this is such a watershed moment. And I debated greatly with myself and to what extent to share this with you. And I decided not to show you the pictures, because these pictures are so troubling. They will scar you. They will hurt you. They will haunt you in your dreams. That's what Israel is going through right now. And as much as we try to prevent our children from being exposed to it, it's almost impossible. I have to explain to my 9-year-old about rape and beheadings and burning families alive. My 12-year-old daughter, we live in Tzur Adasa near Jerusalem. There's an Arab village on the other side of the valley. My 12-year-old asked me, Abba, are the Arabs in the village also going to come and attack us and kill us like they did back there? These are our neighbors. I buy groceries there, buy the best fruits and vegetables. I get my car cleaned in the village, my car cleaned and my tires fixed in the village. They work in our town. We're neighbors. We share the same roads and infrastructure. We have the same sewer system. I said no, because I want her to sleep good at night. But in my heart, I don't really know that that's a no. So we have extra security, more army, more police. We have now drones flying over our houses. We have civilians who are volunteering to a civil guard. Their weapons are being handed out. That's the reality. They did things that we only know, we've only spoken about from Nazi and from Holocaust stories. They attacked a dance party, a music festival, where thousands of young people were just dancing and singing for peace, by the way. They circled them from 3 areas, funneled them into a zone, into a funnel, and just mowed them down. Then they threw grenades into these protected areas. Those of you who've been to Israel, you know that in the south, they have these bomb shelters, 15 seconds, right? 15 seconds away from any siren you might hear. Looks like a closed bus stop that's fortified concrete. They heard the sirens, they heard the gunfire. A lot of people ran into them, so the terrorists just threw grenades in there. Piles of bodies. One of the videos is of a first responder showing up, and in his body cam, he's looking for survivors and he's shouting, "Is anybody alive? Is anybody wounded? Who needs help? You can hear the distress in his voice. Body after body after body after body. Nobody's moving. Everybody's dead. They raped girls next to piles of dead bodies to the extent that their limbs were broken. Their legs were bent in weird shapes. In some cases, they passed them from one to another, and then the last terrorist killed the woman as he was raping her. They kidnapped those bodies. They took them back into Gaza. Thousands are in the streets. Some of them are spitting and, celebrating this. They're worse than the Nazis. This abduction of children, Nazis just killed everybody. They took people forced labor into camps, made them slaves. They abducted children as cards in a game they think they're playing from their beds after murdering their parents. They're worse than the Nazis because the Nazis knew what they were doing was wrong. Those of you who know history will know about the Einsatzgruppen, those German police troops who went in the wake of the advancing German army to gather the Jews and shoot them in the forests. You might know that they had serious disciplinary problems. They had to drink a lot of alcohol to process what they've done, knowing deep down that what they're doing is wrong. Hamas, they filmed it with GoPros and uploaded it to social media. In jubilation, in glee, in joy. In one case, they intercepted a phone call that one of the terrorists made to his parents back home. He took a phone off one of the dead bodies of the woman he's just killed. And he's calling he's saying, "Abba, Baba, open the WhatsApp. Look at what I've done. I've just killed 10 Jews with my own hands." Now I can't mimic the voice, but there's joy. There's excitement in his voice. I killed 10 with my own hands. Your son's a hero. And the father, God bless you, my son. Put mama on the phone. Put mom on the phone. Open the WhatsApp. I want to show you. The mother gets on the phone. Bless you, my son. I wish I was there with you. Somebody had to teach those terrorists from a very, very young age to get to that level when they're grown up, that what they're doing is such an amazing, heroic act. I won't show you the images, but you can take a picture of the screen. Not because I want you to go and look at those websites. Don't look at those websites. But this is the most well-documented atrocity in modern times. And there are already people 4 weeks later, actually it was 2 days later, who have been denying it. People are saying, no, it's the Israeli army, they did it to themselves. So they can justify going into Gaza to kill everybody. And so, and you might not hear this, but your kids in college have heard it. So it's there. They're there. There's only these, by the way, the images on these 2 websites are the not so, or the less terrible ones. The real terrible ones are not even published. The final level is a civilizational impact. There's been a watershed moment on the personal, on the local, on the regional, on the global, but also on the civilizational level. this explosion of the anti-Semitism and let's stop using that word. Let's just call it what it is, the hatred of Jews. Anti-Semitism is a whitewashed word. It's a word that was used or invented in Austria and Germany in the early 1900s to make the hatred of Jews academic and make it palatable and make it culturally accepted. Pure and simple hatred of Jews. See that young woman? She's a Dutch medical student marching in Poland. She thinks she's a good person. She honestly does. She thinks she's one of the good guys. She was interviewed. What's that sign? Oh, you want to kill all the Jews? You want to send all the Jews? Oh, no, not the Jews. Only the Israelis. Only the Zionists. We love all religions. And then she stands by a sign that says from the river to the sea. Now, you all know the map. The river to the sea, for a lot of young Americans, sounds, well, it's a nice rhyme, right? From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. It even echoes from sea to shining sea, right? It's this wonderful little slogan. From the river, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, Palestine will be free. Free of what? Free of Jews. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your words when you open this discussion. I want to thank you for being here and standing by your Jewish neighbors and colleagues and friends. And I urge you to reach out to more. I urge you to give them a call because we're looking at the day after Kristallnacht. And if you're ever wondering, what would I have done if I woken up on November 9th, 1938 and read the New York Times about the pogrom that just went down in Germany and all those Jews who were killed, the businesses burned, the synagogues destroyed? What would I have done? Don't wonder anymore because you're doing it now. So I urge you to stand by your Jewish neighbors, reach out to them, send them a text, give them a phone call, tell them that you stand by them, that you have their back, encourage them, give them the fortitude to withstand this wave of hatred, and especially your kids. Are they coming home for Thanksgiving? Your kids are coming back from college for Thanksgiving? Sit down and have a conversation with them. Tell them what you learned today, because they need to know. The final word is the kids. These are the kids. Out of the 240 hostages, there are 30 children. One of them, Fear, was 9 months old when he was abducted. There's actually a younger one, because one of the women that was taken was advanced pregnancy, and she probably gave birth already, which means that there's a newborn baby now being held by Hamas captives. There's also suffering in Gaza. When you turn on the news, it's unavoidable. But what about all those thousands of people being killed in Gaza? What about proportionality? Isn't Israel killed enough people? Only 1,400 were killed. They killed more than 11,000. So besides the moral repugnance in this body counting, there is suffering going on in Gaza. I don't know the numbers, by the way. These are the numbers that are quoted in the media. These are numbers that Hamas give out. Numbers. A few weeks ago, a rocket landed in a parking lot outside a hospital. Hamas gave out the number or the brief. Israeli airstrike blew up a hospital, killing 500 people. Most of the world's media reported it verbatim, like stenographers of terror. Israel just murdered 500 people in a hospital. By the next morning, we found out it wasn't Israel. It was an Islamic Jihad rocket that failed. It wasn't 500, it was 50. It wasn't a hospital, it was a parking lot near the hospital. So we know that they exaggerate by a magnitude of 10. Right? We have that example. So maybe it's not 11,000, maybe it's 1,100. I don't know. Maybe it's more. Maybe it's more. Israel said it's killed thousands of terrorists. Maybe up to 20,000. We don't actually know. Nobody's gone in to verify. So maybe the number is greater, maybe the number is smaller. I don't know. What I do know is that there's great suffering in Gaza. And I also know that Israel does whatever it can to minimize that suffering. Israel follows the rules of law. Israel goes beyond the standard of any army in the world to minimize civilian casualties. And I don't want to belittle each one of them. It's tragic. The best way to end the suffering in Gaza is to end the war. The best way to end the war is to bring them home. Thank you. Yeah. Can I say a few words about that?
Yeah.
Can I say a few words about this?
Can I give an intro and then you talk?
Oh, sure,
Yeah.
of course.
Uri is going to talk about a project we're currently working on. As you know, we are a nonprofit charitable organization, so any money we raise is tax deductible. But one of the things we wanted to do to try to help out the Israelis, first responders, is to buy bulletproof vests for them. They're made here in Centerville, Iowa, and then we'll ship them over to Israel. He's going to talk to you about the importance of this particular device.
So you must have seen many of these. When I was in the Army, we didn't have any of these things. Today, nobody goes into battle without wearing one of these. Kevlar, this thing saves lives. And there's a great shortage of them. Israel never expected to fight this kind of war, and certainly didn't expect to give first responders or civilians this kind of protection. One of the truths that is emerging after the 7th of October, I wanted to say 9/11 because there's a lot of parallels. After October 7th, is that we need more of these, and we don't have enough because they were only given to the most advanced fighting units, but the soldiers on the border and the first responders, civilians, were never given them. So there aren't enough of these life-saving equipment that helps people get the job done and retrieve wounded and be in the front lines when these are being fought. So your assistance, your help, any of these units that can be produced and shipped to Israel is a direct support to the Israeli first responders and is a life-saving addition to their equipment. So thank you for this, and I encourage you to help generously in doing more of them.
You can see what a tremendous speaker he is. Uri also wants you to know that he will, in better times, provide tours of Israel. If you're interested, there's cards outside, and you can take advantage of it. There's a code on the back if you want to see a video of what he does. I know I'm certainly interested in doing it, and maybe you will be too. But if you grab the card, that would be great. Hopefully, ISI has always been related to Israel through peaceful times. We want to get closer to them in business, medicine, education, science, and all those things. But this is a time of war. It's now we need to stand with Israel. And hopefully we can all do that. If you do want to give us money and you earmark it, we'll make sure it's used only for the vets. And we'll make sure those are sent over to Israel. Again, thank you so much for coming today. Really blessed to have such a good crowd. Encourage you to come in the future too. And thank you, Uri, for your great speech.
Thank you very much. The QR code actually will lead you to videos. I have a video library that you can take a virtual tour of Israel and see all the sites from home. But if you want to support, that'll be wonderful. Thank you very much. Oh, sure. Yes. Sure. In front or in the back? Okay.
Thank you so very much.
I'll be with you.
Did I